After witnessing her parents die in what everyone called an accident, 13-year-old Maya can speak only to her 5 star-marked horses and the traumatized children whose silence mirrors her own. Each dawn, she leads these magnificent animals through town to the rehabilitation center, unknowingly unleashing a gift that will expose the powerful man who orchestrated her parents' deaths and silenced her voice. The town of Oak Ridge, nestled between rolling hills and sprawling farmland in northern Virginia, stirred to life as the first golden rays of dawn painted the sky. Most residents were still wrapped in dreams, their curtains drawn against the early light. But at the edge of town, in a weathered farmhouse with chipped white paint and a wraparound porch, 13-year-old Maya Henderson had been awake for nearly an hour. Maya moved silently through the house, her sock-covered feet making no sound on the creaking floorboards. She had perfected the art of silence, not by choice, but by necessity. 2 years had passed since the words had died in her throat, since the doctors had shaken their heads and told her grandmother that the trauma had sealed Maya's voice away, perhaps forever. The mind protects itself in mysterious ways, Doctor Reynolds had explained, his kind eyes full of pity that made Maya's skin crawl. The accident was traumatic. Some patients never speak again. In the kitchen, Maya paused to leave a note for her grandmother, a simple drawing of the sun rising, 5 horses, and a clock showing 6 a.m. Grandma Eleanor would understand. She always did. Since the accident that claimed Maya's parents and her voice, Eleanor Henderson had become her granddaughter's fiercest advocate and protector, learning to read every expression, every gesture, as if they were having full conversations without a single word passing between them. Maya pulled on her worn boots by the back door, wrapped herself in a faded blue jacket that had once belonged to her father, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. Her breath formed small clouds that dissipated into the dawn sky as she made her way across the dew-covered grass toward the old barn that housed her 5 rescued horses. The barn had once been red, but years of sun and rain had faded it to a soft rust color that seemed to glow in the early morning light. As Maya approached, soft nickering greeted her, 5 distinct voices calling out in welcome. A smile, rare and precious, spread across Maya's face. The tightness in her chest that accompanied her everywhere else began to loosen, just as it did every morning when she reached the barn. She slid open the heavy wooden door, revealing 5 beautiful horses waiting in their stalls, heads extended over half doors, ears pricked forward in anticipation. Each horse bore the same distinctive marking, a perfect star-shaped patch of white fur in the center of their foreheads. It was this marking that had first drawn Maya to them, one by one, over the past 18 months. The same star that matched the birthmark on her own right wrist, a coincidence that Grandma Eleanor called fate's fingerprint. "Good morning, my stars," Maya whispered, the words falling from her lips easily, naturally, as they only did here, in this sacred space with these 5 souls who carried her secrets. Here alone with her horses, Maya's voice returned, clear and melodic, a voice no human had heard since the day of the accident. First came Thunder, the oldest at 17, a gentle giant of a Clydesdale with feathered feet and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the world. Next to him was Willow, a dapple-gray Arabian with the grace of a dancer. Then came the inseparable pair, Penny, a chestnut quarter horse with a playful spirit, and Scout, a paint horse whose calm demeanor balanced Penny's exuberance. Finally, there was Nova, the youngest at just 4 years old, a black Frisian with a flowing mane, who had been the most recent addition to Maya's family, rescued from neglect just 6 months ago. "Are you ready for our morning journey?" Maya asked, moving from stall to stall, running her hands along each velvety muzzle. The horses answered with soft nickers and gentle nudges against her shoulders, their warm breath carrying the sweet scent of hay. To the rest of Oakridge, Maya Henderson was the strange, mute girl who lived with her grandmother and had an unusual affinity for horses. Most people spoke about her in hushed tones, their voices dripping with pity or sometimes discomfort. Children her age avoided her at school, unsure how to interact with someone who communicated through a small notepad and simple gestures. Teachers meant well, but often spoke to her as if she were much younger than her 13 years. But here, in this barn with its sweet-smelling hay and dust motes dancing in the shafts of early morning light, Maya was herself, whole and understood. She moved with purpose, haltering each horse and leading them out to the paddock where their saddles and bridles waited. Her hands worked deftly, securing buckles and adjusting stirrups with practiced ease. "Today we have a new friend to meet at the center," Maya told Thunder as she tightened his girth. "Dr. Sarah says he hasn't spoken since his accident 3 months ago. Like me, Thunder, like I was." The massive Clydesdale lowered his head, nudging Maya's shoulder gently as if in understanding. All 5 horses stood patiently as Maya prepared them for the journey they had taken nearly every day for the past year, a journey that had become the talk of Oakridge, though no one knew its true purpose. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Maya led her 5 companions out of the paddock and down the long driveway that connected the Henderson farm to Maple Road, which would eventually lead them straight through the heart of Oakridge. The sight they made together was extraordinary. A small, slender girl leading 5 magnificent horses, each one following her with complete trust, their hooves creating a rhythmic symphony on the packed dirt. What the townspeople of Oakridge didn't know, what no one knew except Grandma Eleanor, was where Maya and her horses went each morning, or why. They didn't know that these daily journeys were far more than just a girl exercising her beloved animals. They couldn't possibly understand the miracle that occurred when Maya Henderson, the girl who hadn't spoken a word to another human in 2 years, reached her destination each morning. As they approached the main road, Maya turned to her 5 companions, her voice clear in the morning air. "Remember, my stars, we have work to do today. We have hearts to heal." The sight of Maya Henderson leading 5 horses down Main Street had become something of a local legend in Oakridge. As the girl and her equine companions made their way through town, curtains twitched and doors creaked open. Even after a year of the same routine, the spectacle never failed to draw attention. "There she is again," whispered Margaret Wilson to her husband as they sipped coffee on their front porch. "Poor, silent child with those massive beasts. Eleanor Henderson should know better than to let her wander about like that." "Leave the girl be, Maggie," Tom Wilson replied, his eyes following Maya's straight back and confident stride. "Those horses mind her better than our children ever minded us." And it was true. The 5 horses followed Maya with extraordinary discipline, maintaining perfect spacing between them, responding to the slightest gesture from the girl's hands. There was no pulling on lead ropes, no nervous dancing or startled reactions to the occasional car that passed. They moved as one unit, a synchronized dance of trust and understanding that even the most skeptical onlookers couldn't help but admire. Sheriff James Parker nodded respectfully as Maya passed the station. He'd been concerned when Eleanor first allowed her granddaughter to travel through town with the horses, but after months of watching the girl's careful handling, his worry had transformed into respect. "Morning, Maya," he called, knowing she wouldn't answer but feeling it important to acknowledge her all the same. Maya met his eyes briefly and inclined her head in a polite greeting before continuing on her way. Inside the Oakridge diner, Betsy Taylor flipped pancakes while keeping one eye on the procession through the large front window. "Right on schedule," she announced to the handful of early breakfast patrons. 6:30 on the dot. "You could set your watch by that girl. Where do you think she goes every morning?" asked Peter Reynolds, a new resident who had moved to Oakridge only a month ago. "Nobody knows for certain," replied Hank Johnson, who had lived in Oakridge his entire 67 years. "Some say she's training them for a circus. Others think she's running some kind of illegal horse therapy business out in the woods. I heard she talks to them," piped up Betsy's 16-year-old son, Caleb, who was stacking clean mugs behind the counter. "Dylan Miller swears he saw her whispering to that big one, the Clydesdale, when he was fishing down by Willow Creek last summer." "Now, that's just nonsense," Betsy chided, sliding a plate of blueberry pancakes in front of Peter. "And everyone knows the Henderson girl hasn't spoken a word since that terrible accident. Dr. Reynolds himself said her vocal cords are perfectly fine. It's all in her head. Trauma does strange things to people, especially children." Maya was oblivious to these conversations, or at least she appeared to be. Her focus remained on the path ahead and the 5 horses that followed her so faithfully. As they left the main part of town behind, the paved road gave way to a narrower lane that wound through a stretch of woods before opening onto the sprawling grounds of the Oakridge Children's Rehabilitation Center. The center had once been a private estate, donated to the county 15 years ago by a wealthy businessman whose daughter had required long-term physical therapy after a childhood illness. The main building, a grand Victorian with wide hallways and large, light-filled rooms, had been converted into treatment spaces, administrative offices, and comfortable lounges for patients and visitors. Several modern additions housed patient rooms and specialized therapy facilities. As Maya and her horses approached the service entrance at the back of the property, Dr. Sarah Collins was already waiting, a warm smile lighting up her face. At 32, Dr. Collins was the youngest head physician the center had ever appointed, respected for both her medical expertise and her willingness to embrace unconventional treatment methods, like Maya Henderson and her 5 horses. "Good morning, Maya," Dr. Collins said, moving forward to help guide the horses into the large enclosed paddock that had been constructed specifically for their visits. "We have quite a full schedule today." "Everyone's very excited," Maya nodded, her expression serious and focused as she began to unsaddle the horses. Dr. Collins worked alongside her in comfortable silence, having learned over the past year that Maya required no assistance, but accepted it graciously when offered. "Jason didn't sleep well last night," Dr. Collins mentioned casually as they worked. "He's been having nightmares since the car accident. His mother says he screams in his sleep but can't or won't talk about it when he wakes up." Maya's hands stilled momentarily on Thunder's saddle buckle, her eyes meeting the doctor's with a flash of understanding that made Dr. Collins catch her breath. In moments like these, the physician could almost see the thoughts forming behind those expressive eyes, could almost hear the words Maya couldn't speak, at least not to her. "I put him first on your schedule today," Dr. Collins continued, recovering her professional demeanor. "I thought perhaps Thunder might be good for him. There's something about the big ones that makes children feel both small and safe at the same time, don't you think?" Maya nodded again, a ghost of a smile touching her lips as she patted Thunder's solid flank. The Clydesdale nickered softly, lowering his massive head to nudge the girl's shoulder gently. Across the paddock, the side door of the center opened, and a nurse wheeled out a thin boy with a shock of red hair. Jason Mitchell, age 10, sat rigidly in his wheelchair, his eyes downcast, his right leg extended in a complicated brace. The physical injuries from the car crash that had killed his father 3 months ago were healing well, but the emotional wounds remained raw and untouched, his silence a shield against a world that had become suddenly, irrevocably frightening. Dr. Collins observed as Maya finished preparing the horses, then made her way across the paddock to Jason. The girl knelt in front of the wheelchair, placing herself in the boy's line of sight. She didn't touch him or force him to look at her. She simply waited, patient and still, until curiosity compelled Jason to raise his eyes to hers. Maya held his gaze for a long moment, then reached slowly into her pocket and withdrew a small, smooth stone with a natural hole through its center. She placed it in Jason's unresisting hand, curling his fingers around it with gentle pressure. Then she stood and gestured toward Thunder, who waited calmly at the far end of the paddock, his ears pricked forward with interest. To Dr. Collins' surprise, Jason gripped the stone tightly and gave a small nod. The nurse began to wheel him forward, but Maya shook her head and motioned for her to stop. With deliberate movements, Maya helped Jason rise from the wheelchair. Supporting his weight as he adjusted to his crutches, she guided him across the paddock toward Thunder. Dr. Collins watched from a distance, clipboard in hand, making notes as she did during every session. What happened next was what the staff at the center had come to call Maya's magic, the inexplicable connection that formed between a traumatized child, a silent girl, and 5 horses with star-shaped markings. What Dr. Collins didn't know, what no one at the center knew, was that the real magic was about to begin, hidden in plain sight, as it had been for nearly a year. Back in town, Eleanor Henderson sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea and gazing at a photograph of her late daughter and son-in-law. "She's helping them, Sarah," she whispered to the smiling faces frozen in time, "just as you always believed she would. Our Maya is special in ways even I am only beginning to understand." Thunder stood perfectly still as Maya guided Jason's trembling hand to touch the massive horse's neck. The boy's fingers barely grazed the Clydesdale's coarse hair before pulling back, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Maya didn't rush him. Instead, she demonstrated, running her own hand along Thunder's neck in long, gentle strokes, then waited patiently for Jason to try again. From the observation window of the center's back office, Dr. Collins watched intently, making notes on her tablet. "Remarkable," she murmured to herself. In just 5 minutes, Maya had accomplished what the center's staff had been trying to do for weeks, getting Jason to willingly touch something new, to extend himself beyond the protective shell he'd built since the accident. What Dr. Collins couldn't see, however, was what happened when she stepped away to answer a call from the main building. What no one saw except Jason and the horses. As soon as they were alone, Maya's posture shifted slightly. She moved closer to Thunder, her hand resting on his star marking, and then, impossibly, she began to speak. "This is Jason," Maya said softly to Thunder, her voice clear and melodic in the morning air. "He's had a hard time like I did. His dad isn't coming back, like my mom and dad aren't coming back. He needs to feel safe again." Jason's crutches clattered to the ground as he stumbled backward in shock, his mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. Maya turned to him, her eyes both pleading and reassuring. "You can hear me," she said simply. "Most people can't, just the horses and special children like you, children who have lost something important." Jason stared at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly with shallow breaths. Thunder nickered softly, lowering his massive head until his muzzle was level with the boy's face, blowing gentle breaths that ruffled his red hair. "It's okay," Maya continued, taking a cautious step toward Jason. "It's scary at first, I know. When it first happened to me after my accident, I thought I was going crazy." She gestured to the stone she had given him earlier, which he still clutched tightly in his fist. "The stone helps. It's from Willow Creek, where I found Thunder. All the stones there have holes in them, like little windows to another world. Jason's free hand rose slowly to his throat, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. Yes, she answered his unspoken question. I can talk, but only around the horses, and only with certain people, people who are connected somehow. I don't understand it all myself. Thunder nudged Maya's shoulder gently, and she stroked his nose in response. Thunder says your heart is beating too fast. He wants you to breathe with him. Maya demonstrated, taking a deep breath that matched the rhythm of Thunder's own breathing. After a moment's hesitation, Jason followed suit, his breaths gradually slowing to match theirs. For 5 minutes, that felt like an eternity. They stood together in silence. A girl, a boy, and a horse, breathing in unison while the other 4 horses watched from various points around the paddock, as if standing guard. Finally, Jason opened his hand and looked down at the stone. His lips moved, forming words without sound. Maya waited. Hurts, came the whisper, so faint it might have been the breeze rustling through the nearby trees. Inside. Hurts, Maya nodded, tears filling her eyes. I know, she said softly. Mine too. Every day. Dad? Jason managed, his voice cracking on the single syllable. He's gone. Yes, Maya replied, and nothing can bring him back. That's the hardest part to accept. She moved closer, slowly taking his hand. But Thunder helped me understand something important. Want to know what it is? Jason nodded, a tear tracking down his pale cheek. The people we love leave footprints on our hearts that never wash away, Maya said, repeating words that Thunder had somehow conveyed to her during her darkest days after losing her parents. And as long as we feel those footprints, they're never really gone. Jason's shoulders began to shake as silent sobs racked his thin frame. Maya guided his hand back to Thunder's neck, and this time, the boy didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers curled into the horse's mane, holding on as if it were a lifeline in a stormy sea. It's okay to cry, Maya told him. Thunder doesn't mind getting his mane wet. He's cried with me lots of times. From across the paddock, Dr. Collins returned, pausing at the sight before her. Jason Mitchell, who had resisted every form of therapy they had tried, was now standing with his face pressed against a Clydesdale's neck, his body trembling with what she assumed were sobs. Maya stood beside him, one hand on the horse and one on the boy's back, her face a portrait of empathetic understanding far beyond her 13 years. Doctor. Collins remained where she was, unwilling to interrupt whatever breakthrough was occurring. She had learned over the past year that Maya's methods, while unconventional and largely inexplicable, produced results that conventional therapy couldn't match. Children who worked with Maya and her horses made progress that defied medical explanation. They began to speak again, to trust again, to engage with the world again. What happened in that paddock might be a mystery, but the results were undeniable. Dr. Collins had long since stopped questioning Maya's gift and had started simply being grateful for it. As she watched, Jason slowly pulled away from Thunder, wiped his face with his sleeve, and looked up at Maya. The girl smiled, a real, warm smile that transformed her solemn face, and handed him back his crutches. Then together, they began to walk Thunder in a slow circle around the paddock, the first steps in a journey toward healing that had just begun. He'll talk again, Dr. Collins whispered to herself, making another note on her tablet. Just like the others, Maya's magic strikes again. If only she knew how literal that magic really was. By mid-morning, Maya had completed 3 more sessions with different children at the rehabilitation center. Each interaction followed a similar pattern: initial hesitation, careful introduction to one of the horses, and then, when no adults were watching, the miracle of communication. Children who had been locked in silence for weeks or months found their voices in the presence of Maya and her star-marked horses, speaking first to them, then gradually to their doctors and families. As Maya prepared the horses for the journey home, Dr. Collins approached with a cup of hot chocolate, a small tradition they had established over the past year. "Jason's mother just called," the doctor said, handing Maya the steaming cup. He said, "Water, at lunch." Just that one word, but she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Dr. Collins shook her head in amazement. "And I've been working with traumatized children for 8 years, and I still can't figure out how you do it." Maya accepted the hot chocolate with a small nod of thanks, her eyes communicating what her voice could not, at least not to Dr. Collins. The doctor had long since grown accustomed to Maya's non-verbal responses, reading volumes in the girl's expressive eyes and subtle gestures. His mother asked if you could work with him again tomorrow. Dr. Collins continued, "I know it's not usually how we schedule things, but considering the breakthrough," Maya nodded immediately, her hand automatically moving to touch Thunder's star marking. The connection between this particular horse and the red-haired boy had been obvious to her from the moment they met. Some pairings just worked that way, an inexplicable resonance between a specific horse and a specific child. Maya had learned to trust these connections, even when she didn't fully understand them. As she led her 5 horses back through Oak Ridge toward home, Maya's thoughts drifted to the first time she had discovered her strange ability, just over 18 months ago, 4 months after the accident that had claimed her parents' lives and sealed away her voice. It had been a grey, drizzly afternoon. Maya had been sitting by the creek that ran through the back of her grandmother's property, hurling stones into the rushing water, each splash a silent scream of grief and rage. She had been at her lowest point, wondering if the emptiness inside her would ever be filled again, when Thunder had appeared on the other side of the creek. He had been thinner then, his coat dull and his eyes wary. A neglected horse who had broken free from an abusive owner, he had been wandering the woods for days. Maya had never believed in fate until that moment, when she looked up to see a magnificent Clydesdale with a star-shaped marking that matched her own birthmark, staring at her across the water as if he had been searching for her all his life. "Ah, you're beautiful," she had whispered, the words escaping her lips before she realized she had spoken aloud. The first words she had uttered since watching her parents' car plunge off the bridge 4 months earlier. Thunder had crossed the creek to her, water cascading off his powerful legs, and lowered his head to meet her eyes. In that moment, something had shifted inside Maya, not healing exactly, but a crack in the wall of silence that had surrounded her. She had spoken to Thunder for hours that day, telling him about the accident, about the nightmares, about the words that seemed to stick in her throat whenever she tried to speak to her grandmother, or the doctors, or the well-meaning counselors at school. Thunder had listened, his deep brown eyes never leaving her face. And somehow, in ways Maya still couldn't explain, he had responded, not in words, but in feelings and images that formed in her mind as clearly as if they had been spoken aloud. Together, they had found Willow a month later, then Penny and Scout as a pair, and finally Nova. Each horse bore the same star marking, each had been abandoned or abused, and each seemed to have been waiting for Maya to find them. The first child Maya had helped had been purely by accident. Emma Williams, a 7-year-old who had stopped speaking after witnessing her mother's death from cancer, had been at the creek with her father when they encountered Maya and Thunder. To everyone's shock, Emma had asked to touch the horse, her first communication in months. Within minutes, she was speaking to Thunder, and by extension, to Maya, while her astonished father looked on. Word had reached Dr. Collins, who had approached Eleanor Henderson with a proposal, and so the program had begun. Unofficially at first, then with the blessing of the center's board of directors, as results proved impossible to ignore. Maya's reverie was interrupted as she approached Oak Ridge Middle School just as the final bell rang. Students poured out of the building, their excited chatter filling the air. Most gave Maya and her horses a wide berth, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort to outright mockery. "Hey, it's the mute girl and her circus act," called Darren Mitchell, the school's self-appointed king of 8th grade. Still playing horsey instead of learning to talk like a normal person. Maya kept her eyes forward, her face carefully blank despite the sting of his words. Beside her, Thunder snorted, his massive body tensing slightly, as if he sensed her distress. "Leave her alone, Darren," came a quiet voice. Lily Chen, one of the few students who made an effort to include Maya, stepped between them. "Don't you have somewhere else to be a jerk today?" Darren opened his mouth to retort, but something in Lily's steady gaze made him reconsider. With a dismissive shrug, he turned away, his friends trailing after him like shadows. "Thanks," Maya mouthed to Lily, grateful for the intervention. "No problem," Lily replied with a smile. Her eyes moved to the horses with undisguised admiration. "They're so beautiful, especially that one." She pointed to Nova, whose sleek black coat gleamed in the afternoon sun. Maya nodded, then hesitated. After a moment's consideration, she pulled out the small notepad she carried for communication and wrote quickly, "Want to walk with us?" Lily's eyes widened in surprise. In the year they had been classmates, this was the first time Maya had invited anyone to join her horse-walking ritual. "Really?" "I'd love to." As they continued toward the Henderson farm, Maya wondered what it would be like to speak to Lily, to have a real conversation with someone her own age. The thought made her chest ache with longing and fear in equal measure. What if her voice never returned for anyone except the horses and the traumatized children? What if this half-life of selective silence was all she would ever have? At the farm, Eleanor Henderson watched from the porch as her granddaughter approached with the horses and, unusually, a friend. The sight filled her with a complicated hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, Maya was finally ready to expand her world beyond the safe boundaries of grief and purpose she had constructed for herself. "Would you like to stay for dinner, Lily?" Eleanor Henderson asked as the girls led the horses into the barn. "I'm making chicken pot pie, Maya's favorite." Maya looked up in surprise. Her grandmother rarely invited people over, protective of Maya's comfort and the peaceful sanctuary they had created since the accident. But the warm smile on Eleanor's face seemed genuine, and Maya found herself nodding in agreement before she could consider all the implications. "I'd love to, Mrs. Henderson," Lily replied. "Let me just text my mom to make sure it's okay." As Lily stepped outside to make the call, Eleanor approached Maya in the barn where she was removing Nova's saddle. "She seems like a kind girl," Eleanor said softly, helping to hang the tack on its designated hook. "I've noticed her walking home from school your way sometimes, looking like she wanted to say hello." Maya nodded, her hands moving efficiently as she began brushing Nova's gleaming coat. The routine was soothing for both girl and horse and allowed Maya to organize her thoughts. After a moment, she reached for her notepad and wrote, "She's nice. Doesn't treat me like I'm broken." Eleanor read the note and placed a gentle hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "You're not broken, sweetheart. Different, maybe. Special, definitely. But never broken." Maya's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. She wrote again, "What if I never talk normally again?" It was a question she had never asked before, not in the 2 years since the accident. The doctors had initially been optimistic, then cautiously hopeful, and finally resigned to what they called selective mutism induced by severe trauma. Only Eleanor knew the truth, that Maya could speak perfectly well, but only to her horses and certain children. It was a secret they had kept carefully, both understanding instinctively that revealing it would lead to endless tests, examinations, and questions that neither of them wanted to face. "Then you'll continue to communicate in other ways," Eleanor answered firmly. "And you'll continue to help those children at the center. What you're doing there, Maya, it's extraordinary. Your mother would be so proud." At the mention of her mother, Maya's hand stilled on Nova's coat. Sarah Henderson had been a child psychologist dedicated to helping traumatized children find their voices, literally and figuratively. The irony that Maya now did similar work, despite her own silence, was not lost on either of them. "Mom!" Lily called from the barn entrance. But she says it's fine as long as I'm home by 8. The dinner was easier than Maya had expected. Lily chatted comfortably about school, books, and her family's recent move from California to Oak Ridge, filling the silence without making it awkward. Eleanor asked thoughtful questions, and Maya participated with nods, smiles, and occasional notes on her pad. "My dad's the new veterinarian in town," Lily explained as she helped clear the plates. "And he's taking over Dr. Turner's practice since he's retiring?" Eleanor's eyes lit up. "Dr. Chen. I've heard wonderful things about him from Martha Wilson. She says he worked with rescue horses in California." "Yeah, that was his specialty," Lily confirmed. "He loves working with horses that have been through hard times. Says they have the most to teach us." She glanced at Maya. "That's why I was so excited when I saw your horses. Maybe my dad could come see them sometime, if that's okay with you, of course." Maya hesitated, her hand automatically reaching for her notepad. But instead of writing, she simply nodded, offering Lily a small smile that felt rusty with disuse. Later, as they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lily broke the comfortable silence between them. "You go somewhere every morning with your horses, don't you? Before school?" Maya tensed slightly but nodded. "I won't ask where," Lily said quickly, sensing Maya's discomfort. "It's just, I've heard people talking in town. Some of them say weird things, but my mom told them to mind their own business." She turned to face Maya fully. "I just wanted you to know that not everyone's like Darren. Some of us think what you do, whatever it is pretty amazing." Maya's throat tightened with emotion. She pulled out her notepad and wrote, "Thanks. That means a lot." Lily read it and smiled. "That's what friends are for, right? Friends." The word echoed in Maya's mind long after Lily had gone home, long after she had completed her homework and prepared for bed. She had almost forgotten what it was like to have a friend, someone besides her grandmother who saw her as a person, not just the mute girl, or the tragedy, or the horse whisperer. As she was about to turn off her bedside lamp, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Lily. Got your number from the school directory. Hope that's okay. Just wanted to say thanks for dinner and for letting me meet your horses. Nova is definitely my favorite. See you tomorrow." Maya smiled in the darkness of her room and typed back a simple reply. "Yes, tomorrow." She fell asleep that night with a lightness in her chest that had been absent for too long. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, but Maya rose at her usual early hour, moving quietly through her morning routine. As she led the horses down Main Street, the rain fell in a gentle mist that dampened her hair and clothes, but couldn't touch the warm spark of hope that Lily's friendship had kindled within her. At the rehabilitation center, Dr. Collins met her with an unusual frown, creasing her normally serene features. "We need to talk, Maya," she said, helping to guide the horses into the paddock. "There's been Development. Maya raised her eyebrows in question as they worked together to unsaddle the horses. The board of directors met yesterday, Dr. Collins explained, her voice tight with controlled frustration. A new member, Richard Westfield, has raised concerns about our unconventional therapy methods. She sighed heavily. He's questioning the ethics and efficacy of allowing an untrained minor to work with traumatized children. Maya's hands froze on Willow's saddle buckle, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. I fought for you, of course, Dr. Collins continued. I showed them our data, the remarkable progress rates, the testimonials from parents. But Westfield is persistent and influential. He's suggesting we replace your program with traditional equine therapy conducted by licensed professionals. Maya's vision blurred with sudden tears. The rehabilitation center work had become her purpose, her reason for pushing through each day. The thought of losing it made her feel as though she were drowning all over again, just as she had in those first dark months after the accident. Hey, no, don't worry, Doctor, Collins said quickly, placing a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. We're not giving up without a fight. The children need you. Jason needs you. He's asking for you specifically. As if summoned by his name, the red-haired boy appeared at the paddock gate, this time walking with a single crutch rather than being confined to a wheelchair. His mother stood beside him, her eyes rimmed with red as though she'd been crying, but her smile was radiant. Yeah, he said, "Good morning today," she told Dr. Collins in a voice choked with emotion, and he asked to see Thunder. Maya wiped her eyes quickly and moved to open the gate for them. Jason looked up at her, his green eyes clear and direct in a way they hadn't been the day before. Hi, he said softly, the word barely audible but unmistakably deliberate. Behind them, Thunder nickered and stamped his foot as if expressing his approval of this small but significant victory. Dr. Collins watched as Maya led Jason to Thunder, her clinical concerns momentarily forgotten in the face of yet another small miracle. Whatever magic happened between this silent girl, these star-marked horses, and the wounded children they helped, she would fight with everything she had to protect it. Board member Richard Westfield be damned. What none of them realized was that Richard Westfield had more than professional concerns about Maya's program. He had personal reasons, dangerous ones, for wanting to keep certain children from finding their voices again. Richard Westfield stood at his office window, staring out at the manicured grounds of Westfield Pharmaceuticals. At 58, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to power. The company his father had founded had grown under his leadership to become one of the largest pharmaceutical manufacturers in the region, specializing in psychiatric medications for children. Mr. Westfield, his assistant's voice broke through his thoughts. Dr. Reynolds is here to see you. Send him in, Westfield replied, not turning from the window. Dr. Alan Reynolds entered, clutching a manila folder. The same doctor who had treated Maya after her accident now served as a paid consultant for Westfield Pharmaceuticals, an arrangement that conveniently remained undisclosed to his patients. You wanted an update on the Henderson situation, Reynolds asked, adjusting his glasses nervously. What progress have you made on the board? Westfield turned, his steel-grey eyes cold and calculating. I've spoken with 2 members who are sympathetic to your concerns, Reynolds replied, but Dr. Collins is passionate about the program. She has data showing significant improvements in patients who work with the Henderson girl and her horses. Westfield's jaw tightened. Data can be interpreted many ways, Doctor. I need that program shut down before the Mitchell boy remembers too much. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, Jason Mitchell has already begun speaking again. His mother reported. I know what his mother reported, Westfield snapped. Oh, what I need to know is how much he remembers about what he saw that night. The night in question was 3 months ago, when Jason Mitchell had been a passenger in his father's car. Robert Mitchell, an investigative journalist, had been researching a story about pharmaceutical companies suppressing data on serious side effects in children's medications. He had been particularly interested in Neurozen, Westfield's flagship product for childhood anxiety. The official report stated that Robert had lost control of his vehicle on a rainy night, resulting in the crash that killed him and severely injured his son. What the report didn't mention was the black SUV that had forced them off the road, a detail that only Jason Mitchell had witnessed and that his trauma-induced silence had conveniently buried. The boy's memories may be fragmented, Reynolds offered. Many trauma survivors never fully recall. I can't take that chance, Westfield interrupted. This Henderson girl and her unconventional methods are unpredictable. Traditional therapy we can monitor and control. But this, he gestured dismissively, whatever she's doing, it needs to stop immediately. Reynolds nodded, though his expression betrayed his discomfort. He had become entangled with Westfield years ago, accepting payments to recommend Westfield pharmaceuticals, products to his patients, including children whose symptoms didn't warrant such powerful medications. By the time he realized the depth of Westfield's unethical practices, he was too compromised to extricate himself. I'll continue to express my professional concerns about the program, Reynolds said. But Dr. Collins is gathering parent testimonials for the next board meeting. It won't be easy to discredit results that seem so miraculous. Westfield's expression darkened. Then perhaps we need to focus on the Henderson girl directly. Find a way to discredit her, or better yet, to make her and her grandmother decide that continuing this program isn't in their best interest. Reynolds felt a chill at the implied threat. What exactly are you suggesting? Nothing illegal, Doctor, Westfield replied with a thin smile. Just a reminder that actions have consequences. Now, I believe you have patients waiting. Dismissed. Reynolds left the office, the folder clutched tightly in his trembling hand. He had compromised his ethics many times for Westfield, but threatening a traumatized orphan and her elderly grandmother crossed a line he hadn't anticipated. Yet he felt trapped, knowing that exposing Westfield would mean exposing himself as well. Across town at Oak Ridge Middle School, Maya sat in her English class, half listening as Mrs. Parker discussed the symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird. Her mind kept returning to the rehabilitation center and Dr. Collins warning about the board member who wanted to end her program. A folded note landed on her desk. She glanced up to see Lily smiling encouragingly from the desk beside hers. Opening it, she read, Dad wants to know if he can come see your horses after school today. He's super excited, says he's never seen Clydesdales with star markings before. Maya hesitated. She had never invited anyone except Dr. Collins and the children from the center to interact with her horses. The animals were more than pets to her. They were her voice, her connection to a world that would otherwise be closed to her. Sharing them felt strangely intimate, almost frightening. But Lily had shown nothing but kindness, and her father was a veterinarian who specialized in rescue horses. After a moment's consideration, Maya wrote back, Okay, meet at my house at 4. Lily read the note and gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. At lunch, Maya sat at her usual isolated table, but today Lily joined her, along with 2 other girls Maya recognized from her science class, Emma Taylor and Zoe Washington. Hope you don't mind, Lily said as they sat down. Emma and Zoe wanted to meet you properly. Maya tensed, automatically reaching for her notepad, but Emma spoke before she could write anything. "My little sister is Lisa Taylor," she said quietly. "And she was in a car accident last year. She didn't speak for 6 months, and then she met you and your horses. She talks all the time now, drives us crazy." Emma smiled, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Mom says you have a gift. I just wanted to say thank you." Maya blinked in surprise. She knew Lisa, of course, a bright 8-year-old who had worked with Penny for several weeks. But she hadn't connected her to Emma, who was 2 grades ahead. "My cousin goes to the rehabilitation center too," Zoe added. "He says your horses are magic." Magic. If only they knew how literal that description was. For the first time in 2 years, Maya sat in the school cafeteria surrounded not by isolation, but by friendly faces, people who saw value in her silence rather than discomfort or pity. As the conversation flowed around her, she found herself wondering if her voice ever returned fully. Who would she choose to share it with first? Dr. James Chen was not what Maya had expected. Based on Lily's descriptions, she had imagined someone imposing and clinical, but the man who arrived at the Henderson farm that afternoon was soft-spoken, with laugh lines around his eyes and a gentle way of moving that immediately put the horses at ease. "They're magnificent," Dr. Chen said quietly as Maya led him into the barn. He didn't reach out to touch them, didn't make sudden movements or loud noises. Instead, he stood still, allowing each horse to approach him in turn, a sign of respect that Maya appreciated. Thunder was the first to greet him, extending his massive head to sniff Dr. Chen's outstretched hand. "Hello, big fellow," the veterinarian murmured. "You've been through some hard times, haven't you?" Maya watched carefully, noting the way Dr. Chen's eyes lingered on Thunder's star marking. When all 5 horses had introduced themselves, the veterinarian turned to Maya with a thoughtful expression. "The markings are remarkable," he said. In Chinese culture, star-marked animals are considered messengers between worlds, bridges for souls who need to communicate across different planes of existence. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at Lily, who was brushing Nova's gleaming coat, then back at Dr. Chen. "I worked with a therapeutic riding program in California," he continued, his voice gentle. "We had a horse there, just one, with a marking similar to these. The children who couldn't speak to anyone else would talk to him. The director called it a miracle, but my grandmother would have called it Tianying, heaven's response." Maya's hand moved instinctively to her own birthmark, hidden beneath her jacket sleeve. Dr. Chen noticed the gesture, his eyes widening slightly, but he didn't comment on it. "Lily tells me you take them somewhere every morning," he said instead. "Would it be appropriate for me to ask where?" Maya hesitated, then reached for her notepad. After a moment's consideration, she wrote, "Rehabilitation Center. They help children who have experienced trauma." Dr. Chen read her note and nodded, a look of understanding dawning on his face. "Like you experienced." It wasn't a question. Maya nodded, then wrote again, "The horses help them find their voices." "And have they helped you find yours?" Dr. Chen asked softly. Maya stared at him, struck by the perceptiveness of his question. No adult had ever asked her that before, not directly, not with such intuitive understanding. For a brief, wild moment, she considered telling him the truth, that yes, the horses had given her back her voice, but only in their presence and only with certain children who shared her trauma. Instead, she simply nodded, hoping her eyes conveyed what her written words could not. Dr. Chen seemed to understand. "Animals have wisdom we've forgotten," he said. "They see past our barriers to who we really are." He looked around at the 5 horses. When these five found you for a reason, Maya, I believe they're protecting you, but also helping you heal in ways modern medicine can't comprehend. From across the barn, Lily called, "Dad, come look at Nova's mane. It feels like silk." As Dr. Chen moved away to join his daughter, Eleanor appeared at Maya's side, having watched the interaction from the barn doorway. "He sees more than most," she murmured, wrapping an arm around Maya's shoulders. "Und your mother would have liked him." Maya leaned into her grandmother's embrace, drawing comfort from the familiar scent of lavender and baking that always clung to Eleanor's clothes. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her voice returned completely, where she could speak freely to everyone, not just to horses and traumatized children. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. As dusk fell, Lily and her father prepared to leave. "Thank you for allowing us to meet your horses," Dr. Chen said, bowing slightly to Maya. "I hope we can visit again sometime." Maya nodded, smiling shyly. As they walked toward their car, Dr. Chen turned back, his expression serious. "One more thing, Maya, be careful. Animals like these, special ones, sometimes attract attention from people who don't understand their true value." Maya's smile faded as she recalled Dr. Collins' warning about the board member who wanted to end her program. She nodded again, more solemnly this time. That night, as Maya completed her homework, her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Collins. "Emergency meeting called by board tomorrow morning. Westfield pushing hard to suspend your program immediately, bringing Jason's mother to testify. Can you come? 9 a.m. Maya stared at the message, anxiety knotting in her stomach. She showed it to Eleanor, who read it with a deepening frown. "Richard Westfield," Eleanor muttered. "I should have known he'd be involved." Maya looked at her grandmother in surprise, quickly writing, "You know him." Eleanor's expression hardened, a look Maya had rarely seen on her gentle grandmother's face. "He knew your mother. They had disagreements about his company's practices. Sarah was planning to publish research about the side effects of one of his medications on children." Maya's eyes widened as understanding dawned. She wrote, "Before the accident." Eleanor nodded grimly. "Your mother was gathering evidence. The accident happened the day after she met with a journalist about the story." She rubbed her forehead, looking suddenly much older than her 65 years. "I never wanted to tell you this, Maya. I didn't want to burden you with more pain." Maya's hand trembled as she wrote, "Was our accident not an accident?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, sweetheart. The police investigated and found nothing suspicious, but I've always wondered." Maya's world tilted on its axis. The possibility that her parents' death might have been deliberate, and that the same man might now be targeting her program, sent a wave of cold fear through her body. At the rehabilitation center across town, Jason Mitchell lay awake in his bed, fragments of memory flashing behind his closed eyelids. Rain on windshield, his father's worried voice on the phone, headlights suddenly appearing behind them, too close, too fast. And a name his father had repeated, Westfield. The boardroom of the Oak Ridge Children's Rehabilitation Center gleamed with polished mahogany and morning sunlight. 10 adults sat around the long table, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned to openly hostile. At one end sat Richard Westfield, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his face a mask of professional concern. At the other end was Dr. Collins, her usually neat appearance slightly disheveled, as if she'd been up all night preparing for this meeting. Maya sat between her grandmother and Jason's mother, Patricia Mitchell, feeling painfully out of place in her simple jeans and blue sweater. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the star-shaped birthmark on her wrist, drawing strength from its connection to her horses waiting in the paddock outside. "I've called this emergency meeting," Westfield began, his deep voice commanding instant attention, "because I believe we have a serious ethical concern regarding the so-called equine therapy program currently being conducted by an untrained minor. Maya Henderson is not conducting therapy," Dr. Collins countered immediately. "She is facilitating supervised interactions between trauma patients and her horses under my direct oversight. There is abundant research supporting the effectiveness of animal-assisted therapy in trauma recovery. Research conducted with licensed professionals," Westfield replied smoothly. "Not a 13-year-old girl with no qualifications and her own significant psychological issues." Eleanor stiffened beside Maya, her hand tightening protectively around her granddaughter's. "With all due respect, Mr. Westfield," Patricia Mitchell spoke up, her voice wavering slightly but gaining strength as she continued. "My son hadn't spoken a word in 3 months after watching his father die. After one session with Maya and her horse, he said, 'Water.' This morning, he asked for pancakes for breakfast." Her voice broke. "He's speaking again because of this girl and her horses. Anecdotal evidence is not," Westfield began, but was interrupted by the boardroom door opening. Dr. Reynolds entered, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I apologize for being late," he said, nodding to the board. His eyes briefly met Maya's, then skittered away guiltily. "Dr. Reynolds," Westfield acknowledged with a thin smile. I believe you were going to share your professional concerns about this program." Reynolds cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses nervously. "I've reviewed the case files of several children in the program," he began, not meeting anyone's eyes. "While there appear to be improvements in verbal communication, I have concerns about the unorthodox nature of the therapy and the lack of proper psychological oversight." "The same concerns I've raised," Westfield nodded approvingly. "As medical professionals, we must adhere to established protocols and evidence-based practices." Maya felt sick, Dr. Reynolds had been her physician after the accident, the one who had pronounced her silence psychologically induced and potentially permanent. Now he was helping Westfield try to destroy the one thing that gave her purpose. Dr. Collins leaned forward. "I've distributed a report detailing the outcomes of our program over the past year. 37 children have participated. 32 have shown significant improvements in verbal communication, anxiety levels, and social engagement. These results far exceed the success rates of traditional therapy methods for similar cases." "Numbers can be manipulated," Westfield dismissed with a wave of his hand. "The fact remains that we're allowing an unqualified child to work with vulnerable patients." Eleanor Henderson, who had been silent until now, straightened in her chair. "My granddaughter may be young, Mr. Westfield, but she has a gift with these horses and with traumatized children. A gift her mother had as well." Westfield's expression flickered at the mention of Maya's mother, a momentary crack in his composed facade that only Maya seemed to notice. "Mrs. Henderson," he replied coolly, "I understand you want to believe in your granddaughter's abilities. But as board members, we must consider the legal and ethical implications of allowing an untrained minor to..." "Why Jason Mitchell?" The question came from Dr. Reynolds, surprising everyone. "Of all the cases to focus on in your review, why did you specifically highlight Jason Mitchell's file?" Westfield's eyes narrowed. "I beg your pardon." "You asked me to pay particular attention to Jason Mitchell's case," Reynolds continued, his voice stronger now. "You seemed especially concerned about his progress. Why?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Patricia Mitchell looked between Reynolds and Westfield, confusion and suspicion dawning on her face. "I selected several cases at random," Westfield replied, but a flush had crept up his neck. "No," Reynolds shook his head. "You specifically requested Jason's file, just as you've taken a special interest in Maya Henderson's program immediately after Jason began working with her." Maya's heart pounded as she watched the exchange. Something was happening, something important. She glanced at her grandmother, who was watching Westfield with a calculating expression. "Doctor." "Reynolds," Westfield said, his voice dangerously low. "I think you're forgetting yourself and the relationship between your practice and Westfield Pharmaceuticals." "I'm not forgetting," Reynolds replied, his face pale but determined. "I'm remembering my ethical obligations as a physician, obligations I've compromised for too long." He turned to face the board members directly. "Richard Westfield has been paying me to prescribe his company's psychiatric medications to children, including those who don't meet the clinical criteria for such powerful drugs. I've falsified reports, downplayed side effects, and violated my Hippocratic oath. I can no longer live with that knowledge." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Westfield's face had gone from flushed to ashen. "These are baseless accusations," he spluttered. "Dr. Reynolds is clearly unwell. Robert Mitchell was investigating your company," Patricia interjected, her eyes wide with sudden realization. "That's what he was working on before he died. He said it was going to be the biggest pharmaceutical scandal in a decade." Maya's thoughts raced. She reached for her notepad and quickly wrote a note, sliding it to her grandmother. Mom was researching his medications too. "Before our accident," Eleanor read the note, her face paling. She looked up at Westfield, whose eyes were now darting toward the door as if calculating an escape route. "Sarah Henderson," Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent room. "My daughter was researching the side effects of Neurozen on children. She died in a car accident the day after meeting with a journalist about her findings." "A journalist named Robert Mitchell," Patricia added, her voice trembling with emotion. "My husband." All eyes turned to Westfield, whose composed demeanor had completely crumbled. "This is absurd," he stammered. "You're suggesting you can't possibly think—" "Jason's been remembering," Patricia continued, "bits and pieces. He mentioned headlights behind them in the rain, a black car forcing them off the road. Just like the car that witnesses reported seeing near the bridge where my daughter and son-in-law died," Eleanor added, a detail that was dismissed as unreliable at the time. Dr. Collins looked between them, horrified understanding dawning on her face. "You wanted to shut down Maya's program because Jason was starting to speak again. You were afraid of what he might remember. And you," Eleanor turned to Dr. Reynolds, "you knew about this." Reynolds shook his head miserably. "Not about the accidents. I swear I didn't know that. But I knew Westfield was desperate to stop Jason from talking. I didn't put it together until now." Westfield stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "This is preposterous. I won't stay here and listen to these wild accusations." As he moved toward the door, it swung open to reveal Sheriff James Parker, accompanied by 2 deputies. "Richard Westfield," the sheriff said grimly, "I think you and I need to have a conversation down at the station." Westfield's face contorted with rage. His eyes found Maya, who was watching him with a steady gaze that belied her racing heart. "You," he spat, "this is your fault. You and those freakish horses." Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she rose from her seat, walked deliberately around the table, and stood directly in front of the man who may have been responsible for her parents' death. She looked up into his hateful face, and then, to everyone's astonishment, she spoke. "They weren't freaks," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse, but perfectly clear. "They were messengers. The room went absolutely silent. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Dr. Collins stared in disbelief. Even the sheriff paused in the act of handcuffing Westfield. "Maya," Eleanor whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Maya turned to her grandmother, a small, sad smile on her lips. "I can talk, Grandma. I always could, just not to everyone." She looked back at Westfield, her eyes hardening. But some truths need to be spoken out loud, so everyone can hear them." As the sheriff led a shell-shocked Westfield away, Maya felt a strange lightness in her chest. As if by finally speaking in front of others, she had released something that had been trapped inside her for 2 long years. Outside the window, in the paddock below, 5 horses with star-shaped markings raised their heads in unison, as if they had heard her voice and understood its significance. The aftermath of the board meeting unfolded like a dream. Maya found herself surrounded by people asking questions, their voices overlapping in a confusing symphony after 2 years of carefully controlled silence. Dr. Collins was trying to create some order. Eleanor was still weeping quietly, and Patricia Mitchell kept thanking Maya over and over again. The sudden shift from silence to center stage was overwhelming. "I think my granddaughter needs some air," Eleanor finally announced, guiding Maya firmly toward the door. "This has been a lot to process." Outside in the paddock, Maya leaned against Thunder's solid warmth, her entire body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Eleanor stood nearby, watching her with eyes full of questions and wonder. "I'm sorry," Maya whispered, her voice still rough from disuse. Speaking to her grandmother directly for the first time in 2 years felt strange, vulnerable in a way that speaking to the horses or the children never had. "Sorry." Eleanor moved closer, gently tucking a strand of hair behind Maya's ear. "Sweetheart, what could you possibly be sorry for?" "For not telling you about being able to speak sometimes." Maya stroked Thunder's neck, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I thought you might think I was crazy. Or that the doctors would want to do more tests, put me in some kind of study." "Oh, Maya." Eleanor wrapped her arms around her granddaughter, holding her close. "I knew." Maya pulled back in surprise. "You knew?" Eleanor smiled through her tears. "I heard you once. About a year ago, I came to find you when you were late for dinner, and you were in the barn, talking to Thunder. I didn't let you know I was there because..." Well, it seemed like such a private moment, and I figured when you were ready to share your voice with the rest of us, you would. Maya stared at her grandmother, overwhelmed by the depth of understanding and acceptance in the older woman's eyes. All this time, she had been carrying the weight of her secret, not realizing that Eleanor had already shouldered it with her, silently supporting her journey at her own pace. "Are you ready to tell me how it works?" Eleanor asked gently. "This gift of yours." Maya took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. It was still strange to speak aloud to someone other than the horses or the traumatized children. "It started with Thunder. After I found him, I could talk to him. Then to the other horses once they came, and then to the children who had been through trauma, like they were on the same frequency, I guess. Like we were all connected by what happened to us. And today, what changed?" Maya's eyes hardened slightly. "Westfield. The truth about what he did, what he might have done to Mom and Dad, to Mr. Mitchell. Some things are too important to stay silent about, even if it's hard to speak." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Maya. Not just for finding your voice today, but for how you've used your silence all this time to heal, to help others heal." A commotion at the paddock gate drew their attention. Lily, Emma, and Zoe were rushing toward them, followed by Dr. Chen at a more measured pace. "Maya," Lily called, her face flushed with excitement. "Everyone at school is talking about what happened at the board meeting. They're saying you spoke, like actually talked out loud, and that the police arrested that creepy pharmaceutical guy." Maya glanced at her grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she turned to her friends. "It's true," she said softly. All three girls froze, their eyes widening in shock. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lily threw her arms around Maya, nearly knocking her over. "And your voice is beautiful," she whispered fiercely, "just like I always imagined it would be." One by one, Emma and Zoe joined the hug, a tangle of teenage arms and tears and laughter. Dr. Chen stood back, observing with a gentle smile. "The star-marked ones," he said quietly to Eleanor, nodding toward the horses who were watching the scene with what almost looked like satisfaction. "Dun, they've done their work well. You knew, didn't you?" Eleanor asked. "When you saw the markings yesterday?" Dr. Chen shrugged. "I suspected. In traditional Chinese medicine, we believe that sometimes, when a trauma is too great for words, the universe provides another path for healing. Maya found hers through these remarkable animals. As the girls pulled apart, wiping tears and giggling with the release of emotion, Maya noticed Jason standing hesitantly at the paddock gate, his mother beside him. "Can I?" Jason's voice was still quiet, uncertain. "Can I talk to Thunder again?" Maya smiled and beckoned him over. As he approached, leaning on his crutch, the massive Clydesdale lowered his head in greeting. "He says he's proud of you for remembering," Maya told Jason, no longer needing to hide her ability to communicate with the horses, even though it was scary. Jason nodded solemnly, reaching up to touch Thunder's star marking. "The sheriff asked me lots of questions about the night of our accident," he said. "I remembered more after talking to Thunder yesterday, about the black car and Dad being scared." "You're very brave," Maya told him. "Both for remembering and for telling the truth, like you did," Jason replied simply. From across the paddock, Dr. Collins approached, her professional demeanor slightly rumpled by the morning's events. "Maya," she called, "I hate to interrupt, but there are some people who would like to speak with you." Behind the doctor stood Sheriff Parker and a woman in a dark suit who Maya didn't recognize. "This is Agent Monica Reyes from the FBI, Dr. Collins explained. "She's investigating Mr. Westfield." Maya tensed, but Eleanor's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'll be right beside you." Agent Reyes had kind eyes that contrasted with her serious expression. "Maya," she said, crouching slightly to meet the girl's eye level, "what you did today was incredibly brave." The information about Westfield Pharmaceuticals, combined with what Jason is now remembering, gives us cause to reopen the investigations into both accidents. Maya's heart pounded. "Do you think that he was responsible for—" "We don't know yet," Sheriff Parker answered honestly, "but we're going to find out. Westfield's already talking, trying to make a deal. He's admitted to the pharmaceutical fraud and to trying to silence Jason, but he's denying any involvement in the accidents." "Classic," Agent Reyes muttered. "Admit to the lesser crimes, deny the greater ones. But we're just getting started. Financial records, phone records, vehicle records, we'll find the truth." Maya looked at the assembled group. Her grandmother, her friends, Dr. Chen, Dr. Collins, Jason and his mother, the law enforcement officers, all drawn together by the ripple effects of her unique ability to communicate. For 2 years, she had thought her selective mutism was a weakness, a brokenness that set her apart. Now she understood it had been the universe's way of helping her develop a different kind of strength. "Will you need me to testify?" she asked, the word feeling strange on her tongue. In court, I mean, Agent Reyes nodded. Eventually, yes, but we have a long investigation ahead of us first. And Maya, her expression softened, you should know that just because you've spoken today doesn't mean you have to speak all the time to everyone. Healing happens at its own pace. Maya felt a rush of gratitude for the agent's understanding. Despite her breakthrough, the thought of speaking constantly to anyone and everyone still felt overwhelming. She wasn't sure if her voice would remain consistent or if it would continue to be selective, emerging fully only in moments of great need or with people she trusted completely. "I understand," she said. "Thank you." As the adults moved away to discuss the investigation in more detail, Lily linked her arm through Maya's. "So," she said with a mischievous smile, "now that you can talk, you have to tell me everything about these horses, especially Nova. She's still my favorite." Maya laughed, a sound that made Eleanor turn in delighted surprise. "It's a long story," Maya warned, her voice growing stronger with practice. "And you might not believe all of it." "Try me," Lily challenged. As Maya began to explain the mysterious connection between her star birthmark and the horse's markings, how Thunder had appeared when she needed him most, and how each horse seemed to have a special affinity for certain children, she felt something shifting inside her, as if the pieces of herself that had been scattered by trauma were finally beginning to find their way back together. It wasn't a complete healing, might never be, but it was a beginning. A voice reclaimed, a truth spoken, a path toward justice for her parents and for Jason's father. And through it all, 5 extraordinary horses with star-shaped markings, standing watch like guardians from another world. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Maya stood alone in the barn, her hand resting on Thunder's broad forehead. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything," Thunder nickered softly, pushing his nose against her shoulder in a gesture she had come to recognize as affection. In her mind, she felt rather than heard his response. This is only the beginning. 6 months later, the golden light of autumn filtered through the changing leaves as Maya led her 5 horses down Main Street. The familiar scene had subtle but significant differences now. Maya no longer walked alone. Lily Chen often joined her, as did other students from Oak Ridge Middle School who had signed up to volunteer with the now official equine therapy program at the Rehabilitation Center. The program itself had expanded. After the revelation of Maya's unique abilities and the arrest of Richard Westfield, the center's board had unanimously voted to formally establish the Star Messengers program, complete with funding, research protocols, and educational components. Dr. Collins had insisted that Maya remain at its heart, though now she had support from Dr. Chen, who had offered his veterinary services free of charge, and several trained therapists who recognized that Maya's gift transcended their conventional education. "Morning, Maya," Sheriff Parker called from outside the station, tipping his hat. "Big day today, isn't it?" Maya smiled and nodded. "The sentencing," she replied softly. Her voice was stronger now, though still quiet. She spoke regularly to her grandmother, to Lily and her growing circle of friends, to Dr. Collins and Dr. Chen. But there were still days when the words wouldn't come, when the weight of memory pressed too heavily, and she would retreat into silence. On those days, no one pushed her. They understood that healing wasn't a straight line, but a winding path with setbacks and surprising leaps forward. The investigation into Westfield Pharmaceuticals had uncovered extensive corruption, data falsification, and illegal marketing practices. Richard Westfield himself had eventually confessed to orchestrating both accidents, after financial records tied him to a private security contractor whose vehicles matched witness descriptions from both incidents. Today, he would be sentenced for multiple counts of fraud, corruption, and 2 counts of first-degree murder. "Will you be okay?" Lily asked, walking beside Maya. "Mom said we could skip school if you wanted company at the courthouse." Maya shook her head. "Grandma will be there with me, and Thunder knows I'll need him afterward." At the mention of his name, the massive Clydesdale nickered softly, as if in confirmation. The bond between Maya and her horses remained as strong as ever, though it had evolved as her ability to communicate with others had grown. The horses were no longer her only voice in the world, but they remained her most profound connection, the bridge that had helped her find her way back to herself. At the rehabilitation center, Jason Mitchell was waiting, now walking with just a slight limp, all traces of his earlier trauma-induced silence gone. At 11, he had become something of a junior assistant in the program, with a particular affinity for Thunder that mirrored Maya's own. "They're already inside," he told Maya as they unsaddled the horses. 5 new kids today. One of them hasn't spoken in almost a year." Maya nodded, understanding the weight of trust being placed in her and the horses. Though her story had become somewhat famous in therapeutic circles, the girl who could speak only to horses and traumatized children, she had declined all interviews and attention, preferring to focus on the work itself. "Which horse for which child?" Dr. Collins asked as she approached, clipboard in hand. After months of working together, the doctor had learned to trust Maya's intuition about matching each horse with the child who needed them most. Maya considered for a moment, connecting with each horse in that mysterious way that no one else could quite understand. "Nova for the little girl with the burn scars," she said finally. "Willow for the boy who lost his sister. Penny and Scout together for the twins. They need to see that separation isn't always permanent. And Thunder." She smiled at the Clydesdale who had been her first messenger between worlds. "Thunder for the boy who doesn't speak." Dr. Collins nodded, making notes. "Your mother's research is being published posthumously next month," she mentioned. "The medical journal is dedicating an entire issue to her findings on the side effects of psychiatric medications in children." Maya felt a bittersweet pride swell in her chest. Her mother's work, the research that had cost Sarah Henderson her life, would finally reach the world and potentially save countless children from unnecessary suffering. It wouldn't bring her parents back, but it meant their deaths hadn't been in vain. "She would have loved this program," Maya said softly. "Mom always believed in finding alternative ways to help kids heal. She would be incredibly proud of you, Doctor." Collins replied, her eyes warm with sincerity. As the morning sessions began, Maya worked with each child, guiding them through their first interactions with the horses. But it was the last child, a 9-year-old boy named Ethan, who hadn't spoken since witnessing a violent crime, who captured her full attention. Like Maya had once been, Ethan was locked in silence, his trauma too great for words. When Thunder lowered his massive head to greet the boy, Maya saw something she recognized instantly, that moment of connection, of recognition between two souls who understand each other's pain. "He has a lot to say," Maya told Ethan once they were alone with Thunder, "but he can only share it with certain people. People like us, who know what it's like when words get stuck inside." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes wide with surprise and the first flicker of hope. "I couldn't talk to anyone except the horses for 2 years," Maya continued. "Not to my grandma, not to doctors, not to friends, just the horses. And then, children like you who had been through hard things." The boy's hand trembled as he reached out to touch Thunder's star marking. Then, in a voice so faint it might have been a whisper of wind through grass, he said, "The horse can hear me." Maya smiled, feeling the familiar magic of the moment, that precious, fragile bridge forming between trauma and healing. "Yes," she answered, "and so can I." By the time Maya left for the courthouse, Ethan had spoken more words in an hour than he had in the previous year. It wasn't a complete healing. Those took time, patience, and many more sessions with Thunder, but it was a beginning. A crack in the wall of silence, just as Maya had experienced that rainy day by the creek. At the courthouse, the sentencing proceeded as expected. Richard Westfield received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Maya sat between her grandmother and Patricia Mitchell, their hands linked in a chain of shared grief and hard-won justice. When it was over, reporters clamored for a statement, but Maya simply shook her head and allowed Sheriff Parker to escort them out a side entrance. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked as they drove home, concern etching her features. Maya looked out the window at the autumn landscape, considering the question. "I think I am," she said finally. "Not completely, maybe not ever completely, but enough." Eleanor reached across to squeeze her hand. "Enough is good. Enough is something we can build on." That evening, as dusk painted the sky in fiery orange and deep purple, Maya sat in the paddock behind her house, surrounded by her 5 horses. Lily had gone home after spending the afternoon with her, and Eleanor was inside preparing dinner. In this moment of solitude, Maya felt the full weight of the day's events, the sentencing, the new children at the center, the continuing evolution of her voice and her place in the world. "I still don't understand it all," she told Thunder, stroking his velvety nose. "Why me? Why these specific star markings? Why can some children hear me when others can't?" Thunder nudged her gently, and in her mind, she felt his response. Some mysteries aren't meant to be fully understood, only experienced. Maya smiled, leaning against his solid warmth. "Dr. Chen says you're messengers between worlds, that the star markings connect us across, I don't know, dimensions or something." Willow approached, followed by Penny, Scout, and Nova, forming a loose circle around Maya, as they often did in these quiet moments of communion. Each horse's star marking seemed to glow subtly in the fading light, matching the birthmark on Maya's wrist that she no longer felt the need to hide. "I used to think losing my voice was the worst thing that could happen to me," Maya said softly. "But now I understand it was just changing, becoming something different, something that could help others find their voices too." In the distance, the lights of Oak Ridge began to twinkle as darkness fell. Maya could see her grandmother moving about in the kitchen, preparing a dinner that Lily and her parents would join later. Tomorrow, she would return to school, where she now sat with friends at lunch and participated in class when she felt able. The day after, she would lead her horses to the rehabilitation center again, where more children waited to discover that their silence wasn't permanent, that bridges existed between their trauma and healing. Her life had found a new rhythm, not perfect, not always easy, but meaningful in ways she could never have imagined in those dark days after the accident. As if reading her thoughts, Thunder lowered his head until his eyes were level with hers. Maya felt rather than heard his final message of the evening. You were never meant to stay silent forever. You were meant to learn the value of each word, so that when you spoke again, every syllable would carry healing. Maya wrapped her arms around his massive neck, burying her face in his mane. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for saving me." The other horses moved closer, their warm breath mingling in the cool evening air, their star markings forming a constellation of connection around the girl who had once been lost in silence, but had found her way back through their unwavering presence. From the house, Eleanor called Maya's name, her voice carrying easily across the twilight. Maya stood, brushing hay from her jeans, and answered, "Coming, Grandma." As she walked toward the warmth and light of home, Maya glanced back at her 5 extraordinary companions. They watched her go, sentinels in the gathering darkness, their star markings like beacons in the night. Messengers between worlds, bridges across the unbridgeable, silent healers who had helped a wounded girl find her voice and, in doing so, had given countless others the courage to find theirs. In the quiet town of Oak Ridge, people still stopped to watch when Maya Henderson led her 5 horses down Main Street each morning. But now they didn't whisper about the strange mute girl or the horse whisperer. Instead, they spoke of healing, of resilience, of the mysterious ways that broken things find their way back to wholeness. And sometimes, if they listened very carefully, they might hear Maya speaking softly to her horses, her voice clear and strong in the morning light, carrying the simple, profound truth she had discovered, that sometimes the deepest silences contain the most powerful words, waiting for the right moment to be heard.